Welcome to The Pillars, the podcast of the 363rd ISR Wing of the United States Air Force. I'm Chaplain Jim Bridgham.
I'm Dr. Jerry Walker.
And I'm Reichwald.
And we're here, like every week, to offer you some skills, some thoughts, some concepts to help you win your day. And like our wing full of lions, we want you to begin your day with a roar to win. So our roar today, our focus, is going to be on our new doctor. And yes, that was a terrible intro, but we're going to stick with it. So, Dr. Reichwald, you're our new psychologist, our new Surgeon General for our wing. We want to welcome you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys bringing me on the podcast, although I think you were compelled to, at some point or another, introduce a new teammate. But nonetheless, I'm pleased to be here.
It was a struggle. And I know your introduction to the wing with one of the first 5 minutes of Thrive that you wrote was on introversion and loneliness, and you tend to be more of an introverted guy.
I am.
Whereas I would say, compared to Jim, who's an extremely extroverted guy, there's a bit of a clash there. But I think you've melded well with our team so far.
Oh, thanks. I do appreciate that. Yeah, introversion is one of those things that sort of, as a topic, is kind of near and dear to my heart. And in some ways, I think as a psychologist, working in an operational community, maybe Intel is a good landing place for me, because I feel like a lot of the folks that we work with may have similar personality traits, and you find a lot of psychologists as well who are introverted. And you make up so much, you do so much of the heavy lifting for me that I hardly ever have to talk.
You just really have to shake your head when I'm talking, so that works great. So I want to start with a softball question.
Thank you.
What did you have for breakfast today?
Thank you for that softball question. Yeah, you're not going to like my answer, and I know I'm pretty judgy of your protein bars, but I don't typically have breakfast. So usually I'll have black coffee between, I'll usually have my first cup somewhere around 9 o'clock, and then I typically don't do any kind of food until around lunchtime. So
okay. Do you have any preference of coffee? Is it a specific type of black coffee?
The cheapest that I can find generally. Yeah. I'm not snobbish. Whatever anyone is willing to make for me, even better. But whatever I can get my hands on.
Okay. So now we're going to move from the softball to maybe some facts that people can get to know you about.
Okay.
So you're a psychologist.
I am.
Why did you get into psychology?
Boy, that's a good question, and one that I think we've probably had to answer at multiple points during our career. I think with a lot of things, and I don't think this is unique to psychology, but I think having some kind of desire to help other people is usually a good starting place. So I think like a lot of people, that's where I started. I feel like people have always been interesting to me. I'm a firm believer that everyone has a story, whether that's worthy of broadcasting, like in this case. I'm not sure I'm going to be one of your more interesting interview subjects, but I do think that everyone has a story or a narrative, to use another word, that kind of guides how we look at the world, how we see people, how we interact, how we see our futures. And I think coming to understand people's stories and why they tell themselves what they tell themselves about themselves and about other people often informs the way that they kind of go through life and the experiences that they have. And those can be very powerful narratives, and sometimes they're inspiring and they lead people to inspiring things, and sometimes, occasionally, they lead people to despair. And I like listening to people's stories. I think people are infinitely interesting. And so maybe not surprisingly, I sort of found my way toward this field. I believe that too, that our personalities and our interests kind of drive us towards occupations or leisure interests that allow us to give fuller expression to parts of us. So.
Okay. I like that answer. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Most folks in our psychologist field are driven initially by desire to help other people, but there's also that's not fundamentally different from somebody who wants to be a social worker or a medical doctor or a paramedic.
An attorney.
Right, or firefighter, all kinds of different helping professions. But what makes our field unique, I think, is that we have this innate curiosity towards intellectually understanding human behavior and thought processes, and not just the how but the why of the human experience. And I like how you talked about the developmental side of who we are, how we form our identity. I know that was a big part of your graduate research, and so I can see how that interest really drove you to psychology and to really your whole career path and what you're doing now with the ISR wing. But I want to dig into the elevator speech, who am I? Because it goes far beyond your roles or what you do. It's your sense of self. It's who you are as a person. So, I mean, what do you advise people when they're trying to define who they are as a person?
I think that identity is so important, and I think it's important for us to have multiple strong, healthy social identities, right?
Okay.
So let me give you an example. I think I always wanted to serve in the military, I approached recruiters at various times during high school, and for one reason or another, it kind of never took form for me. But in the back of my mind, I think that's something that I identified with. I didn't have a family member who was a part of the military or anything like that, but I was always sort of moving in that direction, I think. But there were other important identities for me. You know, I saw myself as a good student. I saw myself as a hungry kind of learner. I was interested in relationships. You know, I knew I had an identity as a sibling, as a son, all of these things. And for the most part, these were all strong, healthy, positive identities. And really the importance of that can't be overstated, right? Because there will come times in our lives when one or more of our identities is going to take a hit, right? So if you have sunk a lot of your identity into something, let's say I'm an American Airman, right? If that's an important part of how you think about yourself, and then you are associated with something, you know, that's not so flattering, or maybe that casts that identity in a negative light, you can take a hit, and that might persist for a little while. It might affect your mood. It might affect how you approach people and situations. And so it's helpful if you have multiple strong identities to fall back on. During those times, you know, if your role as a relationship partner, your role as a father or a mother, if those are strong, healthy identities, you're going to be far more resilient, a word that we use a lot, something that you can bounce back from. If you have a special interest that you can really kind of sink yourself into.
If you're diversified.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, a financial advisor will talk to you about like diversifying your portfolio. The same is really true with respect to identity.
I really like that because I saw this when I worked in the clinic all the time with folks who are getting ready to separate from the Air Force. They'd spent their entire career, I mean, post-adolescence, they graduate high school, they join the military, and then they spend their entire career, their life up to that point, identifying as an airman. And then now they're facing this huge existential crisis because they are losing a very important part of their identity. They're making the transition from airman to veteran, but they don't have anything else that really speaks to them that they can fall back on. Well, and I see this too. Sorry, I just have a follow-on thought. I think this happens to us not just in those big moments, but I think anytime our identity is threatened, that can hit us really hard. It's kind of like what you're talking about when something happens that intercedes or intersects with that airman identity or that father or wife identity. I know for me, so I was previously married. I got divorced. Part of my big identity was being a husband, and I lost that. And that was a really difficult time for me, but I had I was active duty at the time. I had that identity to fall back on, and it actually threw me really strongly into that role and helped me maintain my resilience during that ordeal. I'm remarried now, and I'm a husband and a father again, and so I've not just added that piece of my identity back, but added a new one. But this is something that constantly changes. I think that we need to be aware of, not just when roles change, but when they can be challenged.
Well, and to add on to that from a spiritual perspective, all of us are going through some form of journey. One famous author's past, Joseph Campbell, addressed it in the 1950s as the hero's journey, that all myth, all religion, etc., is there to help us identify that we're on a journey, we're using narrative to figure out our identity. So I'd suggest anyone, and this is going to turn into a question in a minute, Reed, but all of, whether you're out there listening now or watching us on this video, if you're questioning what your identity is or going through one of those transitions, I'd challenge you, whether it's religious or myth or just a good fiction book, something that is designed to show a journey and something you can identify with. It's easier through narrative to identify where you are and find your identity than just putting it out on paper. So if I just write on paper, I am an American Airman, that's great, and this is what I'm going to do. That's important and wonderful, but sometimes it's kind of hard to make concrete. Ironically, the way the brain seems to work is if you read stories, whether that's history of airmen who've been successful or just fiction, that story of the journey, you can then take this concept of being an airman and make it very concrete in your life, because we hear these stories, whether it's history or fiction, and apply. So here's the question for you.
All right.
And this is not just a specific spiritual religious side, which is not what I'm addressing, but are there any stories that you've read, books that you've read that have been instrumental in helping you figure out what your identity is?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with the first thing that comes to my mind. Susan Cain, I've talked to you about this book before, writes a book, and I'll butcher the title, so you can all go look up this later on the Google webs. But Susan Cain writes a book called Quiet, and the subtitle, I think, is something like The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Seem to Shut Up or Stop Talking or something like that. And I think she writes really powerfully using a lot of different case examples, from evangelical preachers to Wall Street brokers to attorneys, people who are very successful in their careers but who have kind of had to learn how to operate in an extrovert-dominated world, right? These are more thoughtful individuals who tend to take a little bit more time to find their voice and tend to be a little bit more methodical about how they approach conversations. But they all went through something, and I kind of resonate with a lot of the themes in the book. I think a lot during my adolescence, I think being extroverted is just sort of an expectation, right? I think a lot of us who now identify as introverts may have struggled with feeling like they need to be a lot more outgoing than maybe we are more naturally. Now as an adult, I'm more comfortable in my own skin. I'm okay being that person in meetings who maybe hangs back, takes more mental notes, and waits to speak. And I realize that my extroverted brethren and sisters, they think out loud. They process by a different means, and that's okay. But for those, a lot of times extroverts are the more visible models. And I think as you're growing up and developing your identity, and you realize you can't quite process in the way that an introvert does or extrovert does, it may cause you to feel a little bit inferior.
Less
than, right?
Right, because the popular image is that extroversion is the ideal.
Right, absolutely.
And because those are the people in the limelight. Those are our celebrities, those are our YouTube stars, those are all the people who we see and hear more frequently compared to the introverts. And so the implicit message becomes, this is the ideal. This is what I should aspire to. And it's not necessarily the case. And really, the only thing that differentiates introverts and extroverts is where they get their energy. It's about whether you need more alone time or people time.
Right.
And so for you as an introvert, you need that alone time. You need to be able to sit with your thoughts and just decompress on your own. And if you're spending too much time with people like us, it's going to drain you. Whereas for Jim, he loves talking to people.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that you don't get sick of it sometimes, or you need that time alone at some point. But you would probably prefer to be out and about and with large groups of people doing fun things. I know you and your family go to concerts all the time. That's probably invigorating for you. One thing I find interesting about you, Reed, is though you self-describe
I know where this is going.
as an introvert, you have a passion for karaoke.
I do.
I am so curious as to how that interest
I'm also curious,
was spawned and has developed, especially in the context of you being an introvert.
So, okay, again, I'm not sure how much... I see what you did there, trying to bridge introversion to karaoke, which looks very... I don't know, like an extroverted kind of life of the party activity.
There's got to be a story there.
Sure, okay. But I think a lot of us can identify with, singing in the shower or, that sort of thing. So I like music, like a lot of people. And I got introduced to karaoke in graduate school, actually, and it was kind of a social thing that I did with some of my cohort members, and my advisor was really into karaoke. But more than just kind of an activity, he built up a really nice metaphor around karaoke, and essentially his point was karaoke. And I'm not a linguist, so I can't tell you exactly what the meaning is in Japanese, but essentially it means empty orchestra, right? And so the idea is that the person singing really fills up that empty orchestra. Right? They're producing the sound there, and to do so, to fill up what otherwise an orchestra would be producing, some body of work, some body of music, takes quite a bit of effort. And his argument is karaoke, like life, takes passion and commitment, right? And I think
That's awesome.
we should consider approaching the things that we're interested in, the things that are important to us, with that level of passion and commitment, the kind that it would really take to fill up time and space, to really produce something that's either beautiful to listen to in the case of karaoke, or interesting to observe, or producing a body of work that we can stand back at some point in our lives and say, I did that. That was something that I invested a lot of time, energy, and my heart in, and it's something great to observe. I will tell you though, my set usually consists of like Neil Diamond and AC/DC.
Nice.
And Young MC, I think, is in there sometimes. So I'm very eclectic, and I'm a terrible singer, and I think that's beside the point. And I will put a plug in for we have a Friday karaoke group here, which I've actually never attended since getting here. But Miss Pride, our graphics department manager, she actually asks me every once in a while when I'm going to come out. But I put a plug in there for karaoke. I don't think that you need to be especially talented to do it. Some people do spend quite a bit of time. I think it's just important to get out there and open your mouth and see what comes out sometimes.
Okay, so let's see, one more. So this one hopefully will be softball. So you've just moved from Germany. You've probably had to make some purchases. Understand the move went pretty well. What purchase of $100 or less has helped you the most in the last year?
Utensils. I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So if anyone out there has recently PCS'd and has kind of been through the ringer, that's the case with my family. Like, we just lost a lot of stuff. So and a lot of stuff was damaged. So it really has been the simple things. It has really been like plastic IKEA cups that have sort of kept my family afloat, or lawn furniture in the house. So it's been interesting. You talk about books. I think books are good companions. Books give us and they're generally cheap. You can find them online in various formats. I'm struggling here with what I've purchased. All right, we're going to have to edit this as well.
No, that's fine. We don't even need to. I think it's great. Like, sometimes it's the basic things in life, whether it's a blank billboard or, to me, thinking, quiet is amazing too. Because our culture has given that message overall that being quiet, introverted, and a thinker, and maybe gravitating more towards the research, maybe this isn't as good as some of these other things. That's just not true. We can be effective wherever we are and whoever we are. So sometimes those purchases that are the little things become the big things. Like having a fork matters.
Yeah,
when you need it.
Yeah, to your point, I think that goes back to gratitude, because you probably didn't think that way about utensils when you guys were living in Germany or at maybe previous other assignments. But now not having those things, you see how big a role they play in your life. And so whatever else may be going on, that doesn't stress you out as much as not having a fork, or like, having a fork but not having a spoon and trying to eat your cereal that way. So
a couple of times, you realize, when you're kind of reduced for lack of things, right? Some of the creature comforts that you like, you realize kind of what really is important, and you realize that you can be resilient in the face of all that. Yes, I can eat my Cheerios with a fork. I can get them onto each of the individual tines if I needed.
But you got Cheerios.
I got Cheerios, for goodness sake. So certainly someone's got it worse than I do. But yeah, it's difficult for me to think of something that I've purchased recently.
We want to thank you for listening or watching to the Pillars podcast, the podcast of the 363rd ISR Wing of the United States Air Force. I'm Chaplain Jim Bridgham.
I'm Dr. Jerry Walker.
And I'm Dr. Reed Reichwald.
Until next time, we want to thank you for what you do for our nation. We know it's hard work, and we just hope you have a wonderful day.